Senator, you're the chairman of the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. You said last week that you want to curb, you want to slow down, you want to stop the incentives for companies to continue to use tax breaks for share purchases or bonuses instead of, say, hiring more people, hiring more staff, raising wages. This is what you tweeted. And I quote, "More money has been extracted by shareholders of non-financial publicly traded companies than has been reinvested through new equity issuance in 14 of the last 15 years. That's why rules should be changed to put dividends and buybacks on a level footing." Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so when a corporation makes money, they can do two things with the profit. The first is they can put it back into the business to do innovation, to expand, to do research and development, to grow the business. The second thing they can do is take their profits and send it back to their shareholders. There's two ways to send money back to your shareholders. One way to send back money to them is you pay them a dividend. They keep the share, but they make some money on top of the dividend. That's taxed one way, and you pay taxes on the full amount of that dividend. The other way to do it is you buy back shares. So let's say there's 100 shares, you buy 10 of them, now there's only 90. The 90 people who are left, the value of their shares goes up as a result of that. Some of those shareholders are big hedge funds, others are actually the executives of the company. What we have seen over the last, and that gets treated preferentially. You don't pay taxes on that increase in the value of your shares until way down the road when you sell it. And if you die with those shares, your inheritors pay no tax on that increase. So what we're saying is, if you're going to return money to shareholders, it should be taxed the same way. They should tax both of those, whether it's a dividend or a buyback, the exact same way. I don't want to ban them. There's nothing immoral. But we shouldn't have a tax preference for buybacks. If we're going to have a tax preference, it should be for investing it back in the business, because that's what creates jobs. That's what grows the company and increase share value that way. That's what we should be giving preference to by making immediate expensing permanent. And we use the money from the buyback change to pay for a lot of that.
I'm listening to you, and it all sounds so complicated. I think for the average medium-income family, blue-collar worker going, I'm sorry, what? Say what again? So there's outrage, do you think, from just the average Joe across the United States, where they think, you know what, these companies are more worried about the top echelon of a company than the worker bees? Yeah, so if you're a worker at one of these companies, your company makes a profit, they have an obligation to shareholders. They do, and they have a way to get them back money. The two things they can do for their shareholder is, one, they can increase the value of the shares by growing the business, by inventing something new or going into a new market. But that also helps workers because it gets people hired. The other thing they can do is just send the money back directly to shareholders through a dividend. Or they can just buy back a bunch of shares, and by buying back the shares, the ones that are left, because they now own a higher percentage of the company, there's less people in ownership, my stock suddenly goes up. So if I'm the CEO of the company and I'm going to retire in 3 years, I like share buybacks, because suddenly the stock holdings that I have, which is a lot of my compensation, might double in value. So that you're saying it could make both sectors happy? Well, my point being is that there's nothing wrong with giving money back to the people who have stock in your company. There's nothing wrong with it. We should just tax it the same way, whether you do it through a dividend or whether you do it by buying back shares. Okay, I'll follow you. But if we're going to have a preference in our talk, if we're going to have preferences in our stock system, in our tax system, the preference should be on behalf of American workers. And that's what immediate expensing does. It says to a company, if every dollar you take and put back into your business to grow it, to invent something new, to hire more people, you're not going to pay taxes on the money you put back into your business. It helps the company grow, but it helps the workers you're hiring. I follow you. And that's what we want to give preference to. Yeah, I'm starting to connect the dots. Yeah, it's a little complicated, but the point is we're trying to ensure that we treat everything fairly, but we give preference to things that help workers and employees. Let's talk about how to bring down debt and the deficit year after year. That keeps getting kicked down the road. So let me get this straight. Republicans have control of Congress. Republicans have the White House. So from your assessment, how do we bring this down? Well, it doesn't matter who's in charge. It's not going to change until we deal with what it is that's driving our debt. Which is? Over two-thirds of our budget is called mandatory spending. Means Congress has nothing to do with how much we spend on it. It's based on whether or not people are eligible. So Social Security or Medicare, once you reach a certain age, you're eligible for it, and no matter what it costs, that's what we have to spend into it, because you're entitled to it. That's why they call it entitlements, even though you've paid into it. It's two-thirds of our spending. That's what's growing the debt. So unless we reform that for future generations, not for people that are on it now, because they're already in, and we can't change that for an 80-year-old or a 65-year-old, but for people like me, people younger than me, unless we make some small but important tweaks, this debt is going to keep growing no matter what we do on the other
third of the budget. You can't get 100% of your spending discipline on only 1/3 of your entire budget. It would be catastrophic. A large percentage of that is defense spending, which we need to keep our country safe. So until we have the political willingness to deal with that, with the mandatory spending and reform and save Social Security and Medicare, the debt's going to keep going up. And, you know, right now, no one wants to deal with that.
Let's pivot and talk about Venezuela. You recently went to Colombia. You were right there at the border, and you saw the bridges that were closed off. You say what to this?
It's a humanitarian catastrophe created by the Maduro regime. They have stolen all the oil wealth of the country. They've stolen gold. I mean, the environmental destruction in Venezuela is extraordinary. They are making money off narco trafficking. None of it reaches the people of Venezuela. Maduro refuses to allow any food aid to come into the country. And the reason why is because he uses food and medicine as a weapon. He says to people, if you're loyal to me, you and your family get to eat a little bit. If you're disloyal to me, you and your family get nothing. You don't get medicine, you don't get food. And when you see that the top leaders in that country, some are multi-billionaires because of what they've stolen, and then you see the people I saw that have left Venezuela that are now in Cúcuta, Colombia, disabled children, starving families, it's immoral. So there's going to be an effort on Saturday to bring in aid from various points across the country, all led by Venezuelans. And military leaders are going to have a choice to make. Do we allow aid in, or do we participate in starving our people? And if they do, they've made a life-defining choice that they're going to spend the rest of their lives in jail or fleeing from justice.
I know that in South Florida we have the highest concentration of Venezuelans, like something like over 100,000. But to the other folks across the state of Florida, they look at the big picture and go, why are we getting involved? Why are we trying to save everybody?
It's a good question. It would be the fundamental question that we always have about anything. So in Venezuela today, think about it this way. The government of Venezuela, the military, allows drug dealers to traffic cocaine from Colombia into Venezuela, load it on airplanes in front of the military, fly those airplanes to Venezuelan airspace, protected by the Venezuelan military, land in Central America, hand the cocaine off to Mexican drug cartels, and then they bring it across the border and into the United States. That's the Venezuelan government. They're doing that. In addition, Venezuela, over 1 million people have now left the country and gone in, or 3 million have left, over 1.1 million have gone into Colombia. Every dollar that Colombia has to spend dealing with that humanitarian crisis, they can't spend on fighting the FARC, the ELN, the drug trafficking groups that are growing this cocaine that winds up in our streets. And so the combination of those two things alone are a national security threat to the United States.
And the petroleum, the oil component of all this, our vested interests?
We actually, Venezuela is a very small portion of the oil that comes to this country. We actually sell them oil. They send us their oil. They're refined in American refineries, and then we send it back to them and sell it on the global market. But it's less than 10% of our total amount. So they're not really a substantial part of the U.S., but we're about 50% or more of their exports.
You, President Trump, Senator Rick Scott have all supported Juan Guaido, okay? But this has been done in other parts of the world where the U.S. says, you know what, we're going to support the opposition. Let's go ahead and get that person in place, and then fast forward a few years go by and things fall apart. Do you foresee that happening in Venezuela?
Well, I don't think there's any option here. First of all, it's not just the U.S. It's almost 55 countries now, Japan the latest being yesterday, that have recognized it. Second, they're not the opposition. In fact, they're the legitimate government under the Venezuelan Constitution, put in place by Hugo Chavez, by the way. When there's a vacancy in the presidency, the Speaker of the House over there, the President of the National Assembly, assumes the interim presidency until there's a new election. The election Maduro did is widely recognized to be a fraud. There's a vacancy, and Juan Guaido, who is the President of the National Assembly, has assumed under the Constitution the role of interim president. That was their idea. The Venezuelan people did that. The U.S. is just supporting them, and so are 50-some-odd countries, including every single one of Venezuela's neighbors.
And as you say that, I know that who supports Venezuela? Russia, Syria, and others. So there's also that connection of if you put down, get rid of Maduro, then you're also going to squash down any other links that they have to these other countries.
Well, there's no doubt that the Iranians have a close relationship with the Maduro regime. The Russians do. We've seen links in the past with Hezbollah and other terrorist groups. North Korea. So,
Cuba.
Cuba, obviously. So, but look at the countries that support Maduro: Cuba, Russia, Turkey. All of them dictatorial tyrannies, and then look at every democracy in the world has either supported Guaido openly, or at a minimum has said we don't recognize the Maduro government as legitimate any longer. So this is much more than just about Venezuela. This is a choice between tyranny